Hi, I'm Bridget and welcome to my kitchen. Today we're making 3 kinds of gingerbread to kick off the Christmas season in my home. We'll make a classic gingerbread crinkle cookie, gingerbread shortbread bars, and an old-fashioned gingerbread cake. But first we'll make our very own blend of gingerbread spices. So go put on the Christmas music, I'll be right back. Have you ever thought that Christmas has a taste and a scent? Today's episode is all about the power of scent and flavor and how they can evoke memories and stir emotions. For me, the taste and smell of Christmas have always been connected to gingerbread. The fragrance of warming spices takes me right back to my childhood and the feel of the season. The excitement, the anticipation, the coziness. I love the idea that you can conjure the feeling of Christmas in the kitchen. It's reassuring, really, that no matter where you are, you can always recreate the tastes and smells of the season. Today, we're making 3 kinds of gingerbread to kick off the Christmas season in my home. We'll make a classic gingerbread crinkle cookie, a gingerbread shortbread bar, and an old-fashioned gingerbread cake. But first, we're going to make our very own gingerbread spice blend that we'll use in 2 of the recipes. We'll blend 4 teaspoons of ground ginger, 2 teaspoons of cinnamon, 1 teaspoon of allspice, and half a teaspoon each of cloves and nutmeg. This is actually a double batch of my typical gingerbread spice blend, and it will get me through the whole holiday season. We'll stir this together really well, and then it will be all set for our next recipe, gingerbread crinkle cookies. A classic gingerbread crinkle cookie is a holiday staple. And when you look at a cookie tray filled with all sorts of snazzy treats, sometimes it's the simplest recipe that stands out. And that's exactly what these cookies are. We're going to start by combining the dry ingredients, 2.5 cups of all-purpose flour. And I spoon my flour into the measuring cup and then level it with a butter knife, just so I don't end up with too much flour in my cookies. And then to the flour mixture, I'm going to add 2 teaspoons of our new gingerbread spice blend. And because I like my gingerbread cookies to be extra gingery, I'm also going to add 2 teaspoons of ginger. And then we will add half a teaspoon of salt and 2 teaspoons of baking soda. We'll whisk those together, set them aside, and then we're going to mix together our butter and sugar, molasses, and an egg. Starting with 3/4 cup of soft butter. This is room temperature butter. I'm just going to mix this butter a little bit before I add the sugar. So to the creamed butter, I will add 3/4 cup of brown sugar. You can use dark brown sugar or light brown sugar. I'm using dark brown sugar because it has more flavor. It's always helpful to scrape down the sides of the bowl a few times during mixing just to make sure everything gets well incorporated. When the butter and sugar are well combined, I'm going to add 1 large egg, and this egg is room temperature. Once the egg is mixed in well, I'm going to add 1/3 cup of fancy molasses. And this, along with the spices, is what makes these cookies taste like Christmas. It also helps to keep these cookies moist so they last very well. All right, we'll get this mixed in. Now I'll add the dry ingredients, and I'm going to add them in 2 additions just so the flour doesn't go flying everywhere. And I'm also going to give things a little bit of a stir before I actually start the beaters. And again, it'll help keep the flour from flying everywhere. All right. When everything comes together in a nice stiff dough, then you know you've done enough mixing. One of the things I love about this recipe is that you don't need to chill the dough. I've preheated the oven to 350 degrees and we are ready to portion our cookies. I like to use a medium cookie scoop because it's quick and it makes my cookies uniform in size. And also I've got a bowl of sugar here that I'm rolling each cookie in before I put it on the cookie sheet. This is about 1/2 cup of white sugar, but you could also use raw sugar or a nice heavy finishing sugar to give these a sparkly finish when they're cooked. Now, if you don't have a medium cookie scoop, you could portion these with a tablespoon. So just measure out a heaping tablespoon of dough, roll it in a ball, and then roll it in sugar. Both ways work equally well. It's just that the cookie scoop is a little faster. It's a lot faster. Another thing I love about these cookies is that you really can make them fancy for Christmas if you want. You can dip them in melted chocolate once they're baked and cooled. If you really love the flavor of ginger, you could mix 1/2 cup of chopped candied ginger into the cookie dough. Or you could simply top them with some kind of festive holiday candy like a Hershey's Kiss or a caramel. You don't need to make these cookies this large if you don't want to. You could use just a regular tablespoon of dough rather than a heaping tablespoon of dough. Whatever size cookie you prefer. These cookies will spread a bit, so I'll give them a bit of space on the cookie sheet. This recipe makes an even 2 dozen cookies. And I'm just going to pop them in the oven for 12 to 15 minutes, just until the tops are nice and crackly. The timer has gone and these are ready. I did check them at 12 minutes and they weren't quite ready, so I gave them a few more minutes, and I'm just going to sit them back here on the cooling rack while we get started on our next recipe. I've got everything set for our next recipe, gingerbread shortbread bars. You know, one of my favorite treats from my childhood, and I love them to this day, are my mom's ginger shortbread. They are buttery squares spiked with candied ginger and dried ginger. This is a bit of a gingerbread version of those shortbread bars, only the texture is a little bit different. In this recipe, I use flour and a little bit of cornstarch. We're going to start with 1 cup plus 2 tablespoons of butter, and this butter is room temperature, so it's fairly soft. And I'm just going to beat that a little bit, and then I'm going to add 1/2 cup plus 2 tablespoons of icing sugar, and then a little bit of molasses. Now that the butter is soft, I'm going to add the icing sugar. I did sift this icing sugar because it was a little lumpy. And it's 1/2 cup plus 2 tablespoons. Now I'm just going to mix it around a little bit because icing sugar can go flying when you turn the beaters on high. There. Now that the butter and icing sugar are well mixed, I'm going to add just 2 tablespoons of fancy molasses. And it gives it a little bit of that Christmas flavor. And once the molasses is well mixed, then I'm going to add the dry ingredients. But before the dry ingredients go in, I'm just going to scrape the bowl down a little bit. I want to make sure I have all the butter mixed with the molasses. I'm going to add the dry ingredients all at once instead of combining them separately, and then we'll just give them a little stir with the beaters before we actually turn the beaters on. So this recipe calls for 2 cups of all-purpose flour. So I will spoon and level the flour. Now, part of what gives these shortbread bars such a great texture is that they have cornstarch in them. And that just gives them, they're dense, but they're tender. So we'll add the cornstarch. And finally, I'm going to add 1.5 teaspoons of our gingerbread mixture, the gingerbread spice mixture. So we'll just give that a little bit of a stir to incorporate it a bit before I actually turn the beaters on. And when I start to mix this, I am going to keep beating or using the beaters just until everything comes together in a bit of a crumbly dough, and that's when I'll stop. Now you can continue and make a smooth dough, but I just prefer the texture when the dough is a little crumbly. You'll hit a point as you're mixing this that you will think that it is never going to come together because it seems like there are too many dry ingredients. But just keep mixing and you'll see how it will all come together beautifully. There we go. So it's not a smooth dough, but it definitely has come together as a dough. So the next step is We're going to scrape this into a 9x9 pan, smooth it out as much as possible, prick it with a fork, and then put it in the oven for 50 to 60 minutes. Now I've preheated the oven to 325 degrees, so it's all set for us. We're going to bake these gingerbread shortbread bars in a 9x9 pan. And because the bars are so high in butter, I don't need to butter or grease the pan because they sure are not going to stick. So I'm just going to spread them out as evenly as possible. So I'll use a combination of my fingers and the spatula. Now, if you prefer, if you like to have a really smooth top, you can actually roll this dough in a little bit of flour or just on a lightly floured surface into a 9x9 square and then just lay it in the pan. But I don't mind a bit of a bumpy top because before I cut these, I'm going to sprinkle them with a little bit of icing sugar. I'll cut them while they're still slightly warm, and then I'll sprinkle them with a little bit of icing sugar. You could cut these into little squares because they are quite rich. I'm going to cut them into bars, so they'll be a generous size, but they are a nice holiday treat. Now just try to spread this out as evenly as possible so they cook evenly. But pricking them with a fork is going to help that as well. I think that's quite even. So I'm just going to prick it all over, still in straight lines, but prick it all over with the tines of a fork. And as I said, I preheated the oven to 325 degrees, and these will bake for the better part of an hour. So anywhere from 50 to 60 minutes. I'll just check them at 50 minutes, and once they start to look a little golden, then we'll know they're ready. Our final recipe of the episode is old-fashioned gingerbread cake. And this is the gingerbread recipe that I grew up with. My mom actually found the recipe the year I was born, so it really has been my favorite gingerbread cake my entire life. Now, this is a hot water gingerbread cake, so it's fairly light textured as far as gingerbreads go. And you'll notice that the method seems a little unconventional when it comes to how we're putting it together, but wait until you see the final product. We'll start with 2 cups of all-purpose flour, spooned and leveled. We're going to combine all of the dry ingredients as we normally would and just give them a little whisk to combine. So our 2 cups of flour, I'm adding half a cup of regular white sugar, and I will add 1.5 teaspoons of baking soda, half a teaspoon of salt, and a teaspoon of cinnamon and a teaspoon of ginger. Now, you could double the spices in this recipe if you want it to be just a little spicier. So we'll whisk those. And then I am just going to plunk in half a cup of very soft butter. And on top of that, I'm going to put 1 large egg, room temperature, and then 3/4 of a cup of molasses. Now this will come together fairly well when I'm mixing it. But then at the end, I am going to add 1 cup of boiling water. And that's what brings it all together. This is a very moist cake, lots of molasses helps do that. so it lasts really well in a tin on the counter. So we'll just mix until it's mostly combined. It'll actually look like a cookie dough for a while, but when you can no longer see any lumps of butter, then you know that it's time to add the boiling water. And this is freshly boiled water, so it's good and hot. And it doesn't cook the egg because the egg is well combined with so many other ingredients. So we'll just slowly start to mix that. It's such an old recipe that in the original instructions it said to mix 300 strokes by hand, but I think about a minute of mixing with beaters is enough to blend it well. This gingerbread bakes in an 8x8 pan, and I've greased the pan. I've also lined it with just a little bit of parchment paper on the bottom to make it easier to get the cake out once it's cooled. And I've preheated the oven to 350 degrees. This batter starts to work right off the bat because of the baking soda, so you'll want to get it in the oven as soon as possible. As I mentioned, it's quite a runny batter, and that's part of why it bakes up with such a beautiful light texture. And it smells wonderful already, even before it goes in the oven. Fortunately, I have two ovens because our shortbread still has another 15 or 20 minutes to bake. So this gingerbread will bake for 50 to 60 minutes. And again, it's at 350 degrees. Our gingerbread cookies have had lots of time to cool. And because I want to give them as a gift, I'm going to dip a few of them in melted white chocolate. So these are just white chocolate chips, and I melted them very slowly in the microwave, just in 25-second increments. And to dip the cookies, I'm just going to dip maybe a third of the cookie into the melted chocolate. And then I'm going to set them on a piece of parchment paper because I don't want to lose any of the chocolate through the lines on the cooling rack. So just a little bit of a dip to add that extra festive touch. I find melting white chocolate can be kind of finicky because it will seize up quickly on me, more so than dark chocolate. So I was very careful as I melted this in the microwave. And I'm just going to do 6 or 8 of them. And you'll see when we package them all up in a box, how pretty it looks to have a few that have been decorated like this. Now, if you want to get extra festive, you could also sprinkle some red or green sprinkles on the chocolate before it firms, but I think they look lovely just as is. Our gingerbread shortbread have been in for 50 minutes and they're looking very golden, so they are done. I'm just going to let them cool for about 15 minutes, and I'm going to cut them while they're still warm because they do have a very tender crumb, or they are very tender, and I don't want them to crumble while I'm cutting them. Our gingerbread shortbread has been cooling for a while now. It's still fairly warm, which means it's a good temperature to be cutting. But before I do that, I just want to give it a little dusting of icing sugar, just to decorate it a bit. It's good to use a little strainer for this because it just lightly drops the icing sugar like a very soft snowfall. All right, and now to slice them, I like to use my bench scraper. It's quite sharp, and I don't always have a straight eye when it comes to slicing, and I find this just makes it easier for me, but slice them right in the pan with whatever cutting implement you prefer. And slice them whatever size you prefer as well. My great challenge is always to cut in a straight line. Then, so I've cut it in 7 rows, probably should have just done 6 rows in one direction, but now I'm going to cut it into 3 in the other direction to make bars. There, all sliced, perfectly imperfect, and I'll just let those finish cooling before I lift them out of the pan. Our gingerbread cake has been in for 50 minutes, and I did peek at it 5 minutes ago, and wait until you see how lovely it is. It gets the most beautiful lift. It's nicely set, and the edges are pulling away from the edges of the pan, so we know it's ready. We'll just let that cool for a little bit, but I do love to serve gingerbread warm. This gingerbread cake is still warm, and as I said, I love to serve it warm. So I'm just going to gently slice it. This is a wonderful dessert to serve over the holidays. I mean, gingerbread is lovely any time of the year, but it is just so beautiful over the holidays, and it tastes like Christmas. My grandfather used to eat gingerbread with butter, and that really isn't an uncommon thing to hear because it's not a super sweet cake, and it is so comforting. It's a lovely light texture. Just serve it with a dollop of whipped cream. You could make a butterscotch sauce or a lemon sauce, or you could serve it with ice cream. But that is the dessert of the season. I love the idea that you can conjure the feeling of Christmas in the kitchen. It's reassuring, really. No matter where you are over the holidays, you can always recreate the familiar smells and tastes of the season. Baking these gingerbread recipes today has made my house feel Christmassy. It smells like Christmas. And I hope that you can recreate that feeling of the season in your house too. I hope you enjoy the holidays wherever you are. Thanks for watching.